She was 10,000 feet in the air when she realized something was wrong. The man she trusted most was right behind her. And somehow, that made it worse. The wind was screaming, her heart was racing, and the ground was getting closer by the second. And in that moment, she understood one terrifying truth. She was not supposed to survive that jump. Because long before she ever stepped onto that plan, she had already married a man who was never meant to exist. Celeste had never been the kind of woman who needed saving. She had built her life with her own 2 hands. A successful interior design firm and a name people respected in her city. She was sharp. She was composed. And she had learned a long time ago that the only thing you could truly count on was the work you put in yourself. So when Donovan Price walked into her world 18 months ago, she told herself to be careful. She wasn't careful enough. Donovan was the kind of man who made you feel like the only person in the room. He was attentive without being suffocating, patient without being passive. He asked the right questions, laughed at the right moments, and somehow always knew exactly what to say. By the time Celeste realized she was in love with him, the wedding date was already set. They had been married for 11 months when Donovan suggested the skydive. "A gift," he said, setting the booking confirmation on the kitchen counter in front of her. "For our anniversary. Something you will never forget." Celeste looked at the paper and then up at her husband. He was smiling, that wide, easy smile she had fallen for, and she told herself the flutter in her stomach was excitement. It wasn't. But she pushed the feeling down the way she always did, smiled back at him, and said yes. The morning of the jump was clear. The kind of blue sky that makes you believe nothing bad could ever happen under it. Callaway Skydiving and Adventure sat at the edge of a wide open field, about 40 minutes outside the city. A clean, well-run facility with a converted hangar, a small office, and a waiting area that smelled like coffee and adrenaline. Reed Callaway was already on the ground when they arrived. He ran the place the way he had run everything in his former life. With precision, with discipline, and with eyes that missed very little. He had served 8 years in the military before an injury grounded him permanently. Skydiving was supposed to be therapy. It turned into a business. It turned into the only place in the world where Reed felt like himself. He checked in the morning's clients with his usual efficiency. Couples. A husband and wife marking their anniversary. Donovan Price shook Reed's hand like a man who had done it 1,000 times. Firm, smooth, practiced. His wife, Celeste, stood slightly behind him. She had the look of someone who was trying hard not to seem nervous. Reed gave her a nod. She gave him a small, polite smile. Nothing about the morning felt unusual. Not yet. The group cycled through the safety briefing. The staff walked through equipment checks. Clients were geared up. Donovan stood close to Celeste the entire time, his hand on her back, his voice low and reassuring in her ear. The perfect husband. Reed was across the hangar when one of his instructors flagged him over for a question about the afternoon schedule. He answered it, and then did what he always did before any jump. A final walk through the gear room. He almost missed it. The rig hanging on the second hook from the left. Celeste's harness number. He reached for it on instinct, the way your hands reach for something before your brain has finished forming the thought. He ran his fingers along. The primary chute pack. His hands stopped. The fold was wrong. Not careless wrong. Not rushed wrong. Deliberately, precisely, surgically wrong, folded in a way that would hold together through the entire boarding process, and then fail completely at the moment of deployment. It wasn't negligence. It was engineering. Reed stood very still for exactly 2 seconds. Then he grabbed his radio. Stop the boarding. Everyone hold. Static. No response. He looked out the hangar door. The plane was already moving. Reed didn't think. He grabbed a rig from the wall. His own, the one he kept ready out of habit, and he ran. He cleared the hangar door, crossed the tarmac, and signaled the ground crew with 2 sharp arm movements. They radioed the pilot. The pilot relayed back. They were already at jump altitude. Celeste's group was in the door. Reed was already boarding the second plane. He had done 1,000 jumps. He had jumped in rain, in wind, in near zero visibility. He had pulled clients out of panics and talked veterans through their first freefall. But he had never jumped like this, with his heart in his throat and someone else's life in his hands before he had even left the ground. The second plane climbed fast. Reed sat at the door watching the sky, watching the tiny figures already falling below him, and counting. He found her. Even from altitude, he could read the body language. The others were arched, controlled, enjoying it. One figure was different, arms clawing, body rotating wrong, the posture of someone in pure panic. Her chute had deployed into a tangled, useless mess of nylon above her, snapping in the wind, doing nothing. Celeste was falling. Reed stepped out of the plane. The air hit him like a wall. He pulled his arms in tight and dove. Not a standard freefall, not a recreational drop. He was a missile. He oriented on her, adjusted for the wind, and he fell faster than she was falling, closing the gap between them in seconds that felt like years. She didn't see him coming. She was too busy screaming, both hands still pulling at a cord that was never going to give her what she needed. The ground was rising in her vision. The world had narrowed to nothing but noise and wind, and the absolute certainty that she was going to die. Then arms came around her from behind. Hard. Sure. Locked. The grip of someone who was not letting go. She felt the arms cross over her chest. She felt a body align with hers. And then she heard it. The crack and surge of a parachute deploying above them both. And the world lurched upward as the chute caught air and filled. They swung once, hard. Stabilized. And then they were floating. The silence after free fall is something people never talk about enough. One moment the world is all roar and rush. And then nothing. Just wind. Just sky. Just the slow, graceful descent toward a ground that no longer looked like a threat. Celeste was shaking so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The arms around her didn't loosen. And then a voice, close to her ear, steady and calm over the sound of the wind. I have got you. You are okay. Just breathe. She breathed. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he was there or how he had found her or what any of this meant. She just breathed and let herself be held and watched the ground come up slowly to meet them. They landed hard in the open field south of the facility, rolling once before Reed took the impact on his side to protect her. He was on his feet almost immediately, checking her over. Eyes, hands, breathing. The fast, efficient scan of someone trained to assess damage quickly. She was shaking. She was pale, but she was whole. Are you hurt? Anywhere? No. I don't. What? Just... Your parachute was tampered with, he said. Just like that. Flat. Factual. No softening. I found it before the jump, but the plane had already left. I had to come after you. Celeste stared at him. The words landed wrong. They were too large. Too impossible. She looked at this man. This stranger with grass on his sleeve and steady eyes. And her brain refused to process what he was telling her. That's not... That can't be. And then Donovan was there. He came sprinting across the field with his chute still half-packed behind him. His face a portrait of relief and fury all at once. He pulled Celeste into his arms, and she let him, pressing her face into his chest, while the shaking slowly eased. "Baby, are you okay? What happened up there?" He turned to Reed over her shoulder. The look on his face was not the look of a frightened husband. It was the look of a man calculating. "What did you do?" "You jumped after my wife without authorization. You could have gotten her killed." Her primary chute was packed with a deliberate fold failure, Reed said. He was very calm. "I have the rig. I have the equipment log. Whoever touched that harness in the last hour did it on purpose." "Are you accusing me of—" "I am telling you what I found." Celeste pulled back from Donovan's chest. She looked at Reed. She looked at her husband. She looked at Reed again. The rational part of her brain. The part that had built a business from nothing. The part that always chose logic over feeling. Laid out the options in front of her like a ledger. A stranger she had never met. A husband she had chosen. A story that made no sense. "This is our anniversary trip," she said quietly. "He planned this for us." Reed held her gaze. He didn't argue. He didn't push. "I understand," he said. "I just need you to know what I found." Donovan put his arm around her and steered her back toward the facility, still talking. About negligence, about lawsuits, about the irresponsibility of this man who had jumped out of a plane and terrorized his wife. His voice was warm with outrage, perfectly calibrated. Celeste let herself be steered, but as she walked, she glanced back once over her shoulder. Reed was still standing in the field, watching them go. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't wounded. It was patient, like a man who knew how to wait. She told herself she wasn't going to look it up. She told herself that 3 times between dinner and midnight, and then she sat down at her laptop and started looking it up. Celeste was good at research. It was part of what made her successful. The ability to pull at a thread methodically, to not stop until she had the full picture. She had used it in business 100 times. She had never had to use it on her own husband. She started with Donovan Price. His name, his background, the things he had told her about his past. The first crack appeared within 20 minutes. A death notice from 3 years ago. A woman named Patricia Osei, age 44, survived by no immediate family. Cause of death, skydiving accident. A husband named Donovan listed in the notice. Last name spelled slightly differently, 1 letter transposed, the kind of variation that would never surface in a casual search. Celeste sat very still. She kept looking. The second took longer to find. A news brief from 18 months ago. A woman named Sandra Morrow, age 51. Skydiving accident. Wealthy. No children. Life insurance collected. A widower named Damon Price had gone through probate for her estate before disappearing from the public record entirely. 2 women. 2 accidents. Both skydiving. Both wealthy. And both married to variations of the same name. Celeste closed her laptop. She sat in the dark of her home office for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the house, and she thought about the fold in her parachute that she had never seen. She thought about the arms that had caught her in the air. She thought about a man standing in a field watching her walk away, patient as stone. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She made a decision. She was going to find out everything. And she was not going to alert Donovan until she had every single piece. She drove to Callaway 3 days later. A Tuesday morning when she knew Donovan had his standing lunch with a client and wouldn't be home until mid-afternoon. She told herself she was going for information. Just information. Reed was outside when she pulled up, loading equipment into a truck. He saw her car and stopped. He didn't look surprised. She got out and walked toward him with her hands in her jacket pockets. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. I am not here to apologize, she said finally. I know, he said. I am here because I need to know what you know. He nodded once, set down what he was holding. Come inside. They sat on the steps outside the hangar. Reed with a coffee, Celeste with nothing. The sky above them the same impossible blue it had been on jump day. Not surprise, but a kind of weight lifting. Like confirmation of something he had carried alone for a long time. Then you already know more than I did. She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the grass at the edge of the field. I keep trying to figure out what I missed, she said. What was the sign I walked right past? Reed looked at her for a long moment before he answered. Some people are just really good at looking like the right thing. She glanced up at him. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, he said simply. It is supposed to make you feel less stupid. There is a difference. She laughed. Just a little. A small, surprised sound that she clearly hadn't planned on making. She looked back at the sky, and the laugh faded into something quieter. Do you actually love it? Jumping? Every time, he said. Even after what happened? Especially after. There are about 4 seconds on the way down where your brain completely shuts up. No noise. No past. No future. Just air. She was quiet for a moment. That sounds nice. It is, he said softly. He wasn't entirely talking about skydiving, and they both knew it. She looked away first, but she didn't leave for another hour. Donovan moved fast once he sensed the distance. That was his pattern. Celeste understood that now. He had a predator's instinct for when something was shifting, and when something shifted, he didn't pull back. He accelerated. He booked another skydive at a different facility. Across the county, presenting it over dinner one evening with the same warmth. Certainty he applied to everything. You never got to actually enjoy it, he said. The whole thing was ruined by that man's recklessness. I want you to reclaim it. I want us to reclaim it. Together. He smiled at her the way he always had. The smile that used to feel like sunlight. Now it felt like a closed door. Okay, she said. I would like that. She called Reed from her car on the way home. The plan was simple. Celeste would go through every step of the booking. With Donovan, check-in, briefing, gearing up. Reed had contacted a detective he knew through a mutual contact in the military community. They arranged for a discreet camera setup in the gear room of the new facility. A technician on site who would know what to look for. 2 plainclothes officers positioned at the tarmac. Nobody approached Donovan. Nobody tipped him off. They simply gave him access, and they watched. He was good. He waited until the room was briefly empty. He was efficient. 30 seconds, maybe less. He knew exactly what he was doing, and exactly how long he had. The camera caught all of it. They arrested him on the tarmac. He was suited up, smiling, his hand resting on Celeste's back as they walked toward the plane. And then 2 officers stepped forward, and a detective said his name. His real name, the one she had only recently learned. And the smile went out of Donovan Price's face like a light switching off. He looked at Celeste. She met his eyes and held them. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't look away. She just stood there, still and steady, and let him see that she knew everything. He looked away first. They put the cuffs on him in the blue morning light, and the 2 previous deaths were reopened before the sun went down. The weeks that followed were not easy. There were lawyers. There were statements. There were mornings when Celeste woke up, and the first thought was not the case, or the evidence, or what came next, but simply how. How had she sat across from him every morning for 11 months and not seen it? The grief of that was a different kind of grief than she had words for. not for him. She had no grief for Donovan Price, but for the version of herself who had trusted someone so completely and been so wrong. She worked through it the way she worked through everything. Methodically, without spectacle. She protected her inheritance. She protected her property. She reclaimed every piece of herself that his name had touched, and she rebuilt the edges of her life with careful, deliberate hands. And sometimes, when the noise in her head got to be too much, she drove out to the edge of the city where the field was wide and the sky was always doing something beautiful. She came back to Callaway on a morning in early spring. The air was cool and sharp and smelled like new grass. She parked her car and sat for a moment before she got out, looking up at the blue through the windshield the way she always did now. Differently than she used to. Not with nervousness. Not with dread. With longing. Reed was outside. He saw her pull up and he walked out to meet her. No rush, no performance. Just a man who was glad to see someone and didn't feel the need to make a production of it. She got out of the car and they stood together for a moment in the morning. Quiet. I want to jump, she said. For real this time. He tilted his head. Yeah? You said 4 seconds of silence. She looked at him. I have had a very loud few weeks. He smiled. Slow, warm, and entirely genuine. I will take you up myself. She nodded. And then quietly, almost to herself, Reed. She paused. Thank you. For not giving up on something you couldn't prove yet. He held her gaze. I am just glad you came back. And the way he said it unhurried, certain, like a man who has waited for something and doesn't regret a single moment of the wait, told her everything she needed to know about what came next. She looked up at the sky one more time. Clear, wide, quiet. She wasn't afraid of what was waiting on the other side of the fall. Not anymore.